Hello, how are you? How is everybody? Welcome, everybody. This is Kristina's room, and I am one of her co hosts. Welcome to the room. Do us a favor, share this room in the hallways and ping other parents in here, or maybe a tia or a tío or a grandparent that's really interested in having parenting conversations because they're very devoted to the kids in their lives. We're going to be taking questions, comments, suggestions. So you're going to be invited to come up stage at any time whenever you feel like you have something to say. But if you cannot say anything, use the chat feature. That's the little bubble, speech bubble on the left, and we'll be monitoring that. Where usually Rodrigo, our other parenting coach, joins us, so we're gonna probably see him come in here in a few minutes. But that's all I have for housekeeping. And remember, if you're not following the Amigos Club already, click that little greenhouse at the top right and join the club so you can have alerts about all the other amazing rooms that we have. All right, Cristina, are you back yet? I know you were probably
I'm back.
adding.
Can you
Yeah,
hear
you
me?
were probably. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead, take it away.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Amigos Club. Today, we're going to talk about how do you teach your child culture, which I picked this topic because I feel like this is really important, especially, I don't know, how it doesn't matter what culture you are. Of course, here we're going to be talking about how we teach our Latino culture, but teaching culture is really important. And there's a lot of things that we do every day. You may not even realize that you're teaching culture. And there's other things that hopefully you're going to grab some ideas of how you can implement new things to teach culture to your kids, so that they can just be proud of where they came from and who their family is. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm really super excited about it. I'll go ahead with introduction so we can get started with this conversation. And my name is Kristina Campos. I'm founder of The Impactful Parent. I help parents turn their chaos into connection with their adolescent. I primarily do that through the app that there's a link above my head. That app is absolutely free. It's to download. It's available on Apple. It's available on Google. And inside of that, you're going to find lots of free resources for you. I do parent education videos every single week. And oh my goodness, they're short. They're like 10 to 20 minutes, and most of them are about 10 minutes long because I know you're busy and you don't have time to sit there and watch videos or whatever. And you could just put it on in the car as you do a car ride, learn something new, improve in your parenting. And really, that app is just for you. It's awesome because it's help right in your pocket whenever you need it. And just to give you an idea of what's inside that app, for let's see, this week I put out a video all about when things don't go like planned in your parenting, and it's frustrating, and it happens to all of us. And what do you do, and how do you become resilient in that? Next week, I'm going to be putting in a video that I've already created, and it's how to get your teenager to listen to you. And I give you 7 tips on how to do that. But there's things in there about how to get your child to stop procrastinating, or why your child might be a video game addict and how to get them to stop. I mean, like real practical things for just about every family. So check that out. And then I am very privileged to have Dali Rivera next to me. Dali, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Cristina. I'm a parenting coach and I specialize in helping parents of middle school age children who have been or are being bullied, with parenting, with bullying awareness and prevention education. And I usually help parents learn how to advocate for their kids and how to help them get through any trauma in a healthy way. So that's what I do. And I love being here. I'm always learning something, and I like to contribute whatever I can. So that's all. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we're glad you're here today. And this is more of a conversation style today. If you join us on the Amigos Club, we're here every Friday at noon. And sometimes it's more teaching and sometimes it's more conversation. Today is much more of a conversation day. So we want you to raise your hand and come up and tell us, how do you teach culture to your children? And so we can all learn from each other, because we're going to just collaborate a whole bunch of different ideas so we can implement new things into our household. And so, yeah, raise your hand and come on up. And I'm going to ask Dolly, let's go ahead and get started. Dolly, what do you teach culture in your house? Is there anything that you do in particular? Because I know I do in my house, but sometimes it's a little bit hard to integrate because it's not on the top of my mind all the time. Like, I'm not thinking to myself, I'm going to wake up and teach my kids culture today. Like, it just doesn't really happen like that. So, how, is there something that you do maybe even on a daily, kind of on a more modest way that we can get started with some tips of how do you implement it?
Yeah, so I'm a big nerd. I'm a proud nerd. And I actually do intentionally try to teach culture to my kids on the weekends because the weekends is when we can go out and do stuff, right? And the reason why culture is so important to me is because I'm from Nicaragua. I came to the US at the age of 7, and I grew up for the most part in California. When I left at the age of 18, right after high school to the army, I was thrown into a melting pot, and it was so shocking. And I felt so ashamed of not knowing even about other Latinos. I mean, I was so oblivious. I realized that I lived in such a tiny little bubble, and not having awareness of differences made me look really ignorant, and I couldn't even engage in certain conversations because I couldn't relate, or I hadn't heard like dialects, and not just about Latinos, but like I remember in basic training, there was the first Southern person I heard speak. I was like, "What are they saying? And why? Why do they say it like that?" So culture encompasses so much, right? It's not just like, I mean, it's everything. It's food, music, the way we speak, our dialect, the way we greet each other. So because of that, I have always tried to expose my kids to different cultures, and I encourage them to have friends that look different, that are from different places. And I know that that's sometimes hard depending on where you live. Like right now, we live in an area that's predominantly white, but I tell them, like, hey, even among this quote unquote white community, if you start asking the kids about their background, then you can learn that their ancestors, they all come from different places. And so, of course, I've done, like music. My kids and I have tackled different languages together, museums, food, of course. And now that everything's opening back up, I have actually been looking for things to go to, like festivals. Baltimore, here in Maryland, they used to have all these events. Like I remember Greek Week, they'd have like all Greek food, entertainment at Patterson Park in Baltimore. Then they had like the whole like Latin festival. Then they had like Juneteenth. Juneteenth is coming up, so that's really great. It's the 19th of June. A lot of people still don't really know what it's about, but that's my long answer. So I'm gonna stop right there because I see Rodrigo's here, and I want to give everybody else the opportunity to speak. So I'm done.
Welcome, Rodrigo. We're happy you're here with us today.
Hey, same. I love Dali's answer right now. Culture is such, it encompasses so much, and it's really important, that we do expose our kids to culture. And so I'm glad that she's doing that, and she mentioned some really good stuff. So yeah, I'm really happy to and excited to be here to help lead the conversation, and explore how we can make sure we teach our kids culture. And again, it doesn't have to be our culture only. It's about exploring other people's cultures as well. I think that's one thing that gets lost in the sauce a bit. We do a great job of exposing our kids to our culture, but then what about other people's cultures? And I know, me growing up in San Antonio, I don't really think that my mom and dad did a very excuse me, significant job of teaching me culture, because we just lived that. So I know about Mexicanidad, I know the holidays, I know this and that, the language, that was my first language, but it was other cultures that I wasn't exposed to. And it took me going to college, going to the University of Houston in Houston, Texas, to really grasp that, oh man, there's other cultures and there's other things and this and that. So yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation with y'all.
I think that I love those different perspectives on culture, teaching other people's culture, teaching our own culture. And I'm going to bring up another different perspective that I don't know if anybody can relate with. And that is so when it comes to teaching our own culture, sometimes, we get into success, which is awesome. But then when we get more successful, we tend to immerse ourselves in more of a white person's culture. And this is what happened with my ex-husband. When I was married, he was very successful, and we decided to move into this nice house. But of course, it was a primarily predominant white neighborhood. And soon after, we had our first child, which you guys know through the Amigos Club. His name is Cortez, and Cortez, you've met him before. He's an awesome kid. But when he was little, we even had this conversation once where I was just talking to him, and I think I was making tortillas that morning and stuff, and I was explaining like, yes, this is part of our culture. It's what we do as Mexican Americans. And he looked at me with a deer in the headlights look and was like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's part of our culture. This is who we are. We're Mexican Americans." And he just looked at me and he's like, "You mean I'm not white?" And I'm like, "What are you just talking? What? Did you just say that?" I couldn't believe it. But from his perspective, he had grown up in that culture. And then I realized that, oh my goodness, I need to teach my kid culture. And this is really where it really hit home for me that holy shit, I am totally doing something wrong. I need to implement this and make sure my kids know where they're coming from. So I think it's all across the board. I just wanted to tell you guys that funny story. And welcome to the stage, Hanan. Welcome. I hope that you have something awesome to contribute to our conversation today.
Thank you very much, and thank you for pronouncing my name right too, Hanan. And your topic is really interesting. Okay, um, teaching our kids culture. Uh, Actually, I grew up in a different culture, and I am living now in I don't know, I can say second or third culture. So, growing up during all my life, I had the opportunity to live in different places and be exposed to different cultures. So, when I got married and got my kids, and I was raising them in a different culture from the culture I was raised in, it was a challenge for me because it's a different culture. So, as parents, we try, or most parents, we try and raise our kids in that different culture with the culture that we grew in. And I think that's wrong from my experience. It's nice to teach them your culture, to expose them to your culture, to get them tied to your culture, but at the same time, let them integrate into other cultures, let them learn from that culture, let them see other people, and at the end, they will come as something different, not your culture, not that culture, something which I say it's another, let's say, third generation with two cultures. They got the good from this and the good from this, and you have another person, which that I noticed with my kids growing up. So I find some people, they raise their kids, let's say, very conservative. They don't want them to integrate with other cultures or other people, and they just keep them tied, and that's not right. It will affect them very badly when they grow up, and it's not in their favor at all. Diversity is very important. What I do when I, let's say, move to a new neighborhood, if it's, let's say, whitely dominant, I always go and knock the door to my neighbors. I try to reach out to them because I'm the one who moved to the neighborhood, right? They don't know me. They don't know what is, my reaction to them if they came and knock the door. So I go, I tell them that I'm your new neighbor. Next time I'll go and take a treat or something, and I try to get to know my neighbors. And that's how people should be, know each other. Um, it doesn't matter. Nobody is superior to anybody. We're all equal. We have to treat everybody the way we want to be treated. And that's my philosophy in life. And thank you for the space and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for that contribution, Hanan. I feel like that's a great thing to say, like that we do want to learn about other people's cultures, like you and Rodrigo had mentioned, and I love that you're going to your neighbor and you're meeting your neighbors. We don't do that enough anymore. We don't know the people we live next to, and God, that's so sad because that's not how it used to be. But I love that suggestion. And when I would add to that, that if you want to go and meet your neighbor and figure out like where they're from and what their background is, bring them something from your culture to them and see if they are open to the idea of having it, whether it's a bizcochito because that's a very popular cookie here in our culture, and maybe whatever their culture is doesn't have something like that, and maybe they've never tasted anything like that. I would be really thrilled if this happened to me. If I had somebody from a different culture come and knock on my door with some food from their culture, I'd be stoked. Right. And so I kind of like to go with that, treat other people the way that you want to be treated. And that's what I would want. So it's like, why not? Why am I not doing that with my kids? I think that's something that we're going to have to do this summer. And that's what we're doing today in this room. We're tallying up some ideas so that we can put them in our back pocket and start doing that with our kids. So thank you for that contribution. And welcome, Danai. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. Happy Friday.
Yes, happy Friday. Do you consciously teach culture to your boys?
Oh man, I go overboard if there's such a thing in teaching culture to my kids. They know the entire history of Cuba. they, they know um, that, yeah, they know the entire history of Cuba. They know a lot of the history of the United States Hispanic culture and all the different influxes. So I would say yes. I definitely teach culture. The food, the music, our ancestral stories, all of it. And I very very much share it with a lot of our friends and family too.
So, do you teach the history of Cuba? How do you do that? Do you get books? How did you do that? I know because books is another good way to teach kids culture from any age, but how did you do that?
So I I use a lot of different tools. When they were little, it was a lot of music and it was a lot of storytelling, and especially when we had our ancestors that are no longer around, that were around when they were little. We used to have a lot of get-togethers at my house where there was so much storytelling, and I actually wrote down a lot of those stories. I recorded a lot of those stories and I would retell them to my kids. We did use a few books, and they've learned about like Jose Marti, and I've taught them a few of the poems like Los Zapaticos de Rosa, and just I use a lot of different tools. But yeah, we've used books. My favorite tool is storytelling, though. Story for me, you can't beat storytelling because you can really you can kind of pepper it with little things that may be super interesting that sometimes isn't in a book per se. So yeah, I used a bunch of different. I would say we, but no, it was really just me. I used a bunch of different formats and things.
And that's so important for you to mention, though, that maybe it was just you. And that's okay, because even though you might be in a dual or even a quad household where there's like four parents or two parents, we have all these different combinations anymore. Um, but it could just be you. And that's okay to, you can just teach culture and take this on your own. You don't feel like you have to have a co-parent help you with this. It would be awesome if they did, but you don't need that in order to get this point across to your kids. So I love those ideas and that those are things that you mentioned. Curious, Dali, being from Nicaragua, which part of your culture did you focus with your kids on the most? I mean, do you do more of I think the history is probably one of the more harder ones to teach. That's why I was asking Danai about it. But food is usually pretty easy and typical. I don't know what part of the culture do you teach? Because there's so many different facets to culture. I mean, it's just not one thing.
Yeah, well, of course, with food, I tell them, the meals that I know how to cook and why we eat what we eat, and just it's history. So I try not to be too nerdy because they're usually like roll their eyes or like, oh, go, oh boy, there she goes. I don't talk to them a lot about the whole political and government side because that doesn't seem to really engage them. Although I do throw in a few things here and there, but what I mostly do is talk to them about the cultural like celebrations. Like for example, Mother's Day was the 30th of May, which is very different than so many other countries. And also like La Santa Purísima, what that is, and like many other Latin American countries, a lot of the cultural things are related to religion. And so while we are actually not religious, so I try to teach them that because I feel like they're missing out on that part because, we're not churchgoers or anything like that. So they don't know that aspect. And so I have to explain it to them, show it to them, and I encourage them to attend ceremonies from people. And it's hard around here to find a Nicaragüense. So while it's hard to find like Nicaraguan type of celebrations, I always encourage them to go to like their friends because if it's something similar, they can at least get kind of an idea of what it feels like to be in that community and how the religion impacts the celebrations. Like for example, my children are now 15 and 14. So before my eldest turned 15, I asked her if she wanted a quinceañera, and so we started talking about why are quinceañeras done. A lot of people don't know that it's an old way of offering your now available daughter to gentlemen for marriage, and that's how it originated. But most people don't know that now it's very commercialized and all. But then there's a religious aspect to it where the girl had to be like pure enough and she had to have a certain blessing, and that's why most quinceañeras have the church ceremony. It's pretty much a big like an hour long mass with a blessing, a special blessing for her, and then she's sent out to the world to become a young woman. And like they'll ask me like, why do they do the exchange of the shoe? And I'm like, it's a symbolism from a young girl to a woman. And why do they do the dances? Because in Nicaragua we don't do the whole court of like the 15 or 14 chambelanes and damas. It's just a girl, and it's usually just a white dress. And then we came to the US, and I remember noticing, oh, quinceañeras here in the US, it's like a huge court and the dresses are colorful. So I explained to them about that, and I've taken them to some of those birthday parties, right? So things like that way it's fun, it's enjoyable, and it really resonates because they're going and experiencing that event rather than just reading about it or watching it. But I do occasionally also, like recently, because my husband's Guatemalteco, he's from Guatemala. So there's this documentary, I think it's on Netflix, about Guatemala. And that's a place I have not been to yet. And I really want my kids to go. So I'm like, girls, come and join me. And they're like, oh, but I got them to stick around, yeah, for a little bit. And I'm like, look, that is so cool. We're going next year for Semana Santa. And they're like, what's Semana Santa? Easter week. And they have this beautiful like celebration where they line up the streets with this, they call it the carpetas, which is like sawdust colored, or they use other materials like sand and it's colored. And they make these beautiful, like arty, artistic, like flower things on the street. And then there's like a procession of like a big people holding the cross and the santos and the virgenes, the virgins. So I just try to show them as much as possible, but definitely the events, the music, and the food, those three are definitely like attention grabbers. So that's all.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. I'm going to ask Rodrigo something here in just a second. So wake up, Rodrigo, because I'm going to ask you. But before I do, I just want to remind everybody this is a conversation. Come up and join us and how you teach culture to your kids, because we're just collaborating a whole bunch of different ideas and what's important to us. And Rodrigo, so the other day we were in the Amigos Club in the morning, 8 a.m., or it's 8 a.m. here, but the networking. And you had mentioned that growing up in San Antonio, that you were immersed already in your culture. And so, my question to you is, if your family, if your boys grew up immersed already in the Latino culture or the Mexican American culture that's right there in San Antonio, um, how is it that you teach other cultures to your kids so that when they leave the house and they get out of San Antonio, they're not, shocked, overwhelmed, going, what the heck? What's this? Not keeping them in the bubble. And I'd like to know how you do that.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, Christina, because we're able to really be engulfed in our own cultura here in San Antonio. So my boys and I, we can eat Mexican food. We can go to a Mexican oriented event, a parade, whatever, all kinds of stuff you can do here in San Antonio, and even just in our own interactions, right? When we talk to my dad or my mom, for example, and we talk about this and that, blah blah blah, but it's about the other cultures, appreciating what's going on with other folks around us. That's really important. And one of the things that I always do is making sure that we talk about things that are going on, current events, things that are happening in the news. And I'll ask my boys, hey, what do you think about this? Hey, did you hear about that? And oftentimes, because growing up, you kind of worry about who you are and who you're friends with and this and that, but you may not consider what's going on with other folks' lives. And I think that's really a kind of a key moment that you could take into account whenever you're trying to teach other people's cultures. Whenever something comes up and they have a question about it, you could be the educator when it comes to that, and go find resources to learn about that. I remember a couple of years ago, well, actually last year, when the whole entire country was basically protesting, either on one side or the other, protesting what happened when the murder of George Floyd. And I participated in the marches. My sons, they saw some of the pictures and this and that, and they asked me, "Hey, what happened?" And then I told them, "Hey, well, this is what happens." Blah blah blah. Went through a whole history of this and that. I think it's really important to give them that perspective. And I know I'm talking more about like a news kind of thing as opposed to a culture thing, but at the same time, they start understanding that perspective and seeing that there's biases out there. Okay, why should I not see things this way? Well, look, here's why, and X, Y, Z, blah blah blah. Basically, what I'm saying is, whenever you start taking other people's perspectives into consideration, you really do humanize folks. You really let your kids know. Well, I'll speak for my kids. I really let my kids know, like, hey, everybody's got experiences. They're different, but at the end of the day, they are who they are, and it's much more valuable if you learn who they are, understand what their cultures are, understand their practices, all this other stuff, because it'll give you a greater appreciation and an understanding. I'll end right here. We end up a lot of times fearing what we don't know, and I think a lot of folks kind of base their knowledge based on that, based on not knowing. They're fearful. You see a lot of folks, fearful of immigrants, for example, and it's not necessarily because they feel immigrants are dangerous, this and that. Although there's media and all that stuff, it's more because they don't know them. They don't. They really don't know them. And once you get to know folks, and you get to know that their cultures, their traditions, and this and that, a lot of times people just start appreciating them. They, oh shit, oh, that's, oh my god, that tastes delicious. Let me get some more. Oh my god, oh, y'all do that. It's just when you start understanding somebody else and appreciating what they bring to the table, that you could really get over that fear. And I think a lot of folks really benefit from that if they just got over that fear and try to understand folks instead.
Very well said, Rodrigo. Absolutely. I'm going to get to Juan here in just a second. I just wanted to add to you and put in my own 2 bits with that. And I absolutely agree. Because I'm in a predominantly white neighborhood, I feel like I have to make culture, all kinds of teaching of culture, really, really intentional. And so, with my own kids, of course, we're celebrating holidays and I'm making tortillas and I'm, making sure they're all the foods. But we also, one of the things that we do as a family is we take an international vacation every year, and it's actually written inside of my divorce agreement so that my ex-husband and we do this every year with our kids, and we can't get out of it, and it's just the 6 of us, even though we're divorced. And it was a something that we felt was so important to teach our kids about the value of travel and learning new places, but also with the cultural component. And so we have done our own culture as far as Latino culture, where we have been to, different places in Mexico, of course. I've taken my kids to Dia de los Muertos in Oaxaca. I have taken my kids to the running of the bulls in Spain and Pamplona, but also then to other cultures, where we go to China and we go to Brazil and we go to Costa Rica. And every year is different. And as you can imagine, we've been to so many different places because my kids are, I have even college kids now. So, but we continue this tradition, and it's one of those things that we do intentionally to teach culture, and immerse ourselves in those. So on those, especially the vacations, those international vacations, I'll make sure that we play soccer with the little kids in the park, and we go into maybe I'll arrange something with a travel agent where we can go into a home and actually experience it like there, and not just always have to be in the nice hotel or whatever. And but it's a real intentional thing. I have to plan it out, and it's kind of exhausting, I'm not gonna lie, but it's exciting and it's fun and it's important to me. And thank you, Juan, for joining us on the stage. How do you teach culture in your house?
Yeah, we were kind of lucky with our kids because we I had to move to the Philippines for 2 years for work. So I grew up in South Texas. I'm about 3 hours south of Rodrigo, and so it's we're Mexican American, and obviously the culture is super easy. But growing in the Philippines, my kids went to a preschool, and their classmates were from all over the world. It was all expats. So they got to experience like their best friends were one was from India, one was from Japan, and it was really easy to talk through like different cultures because they were living it. But being back home, it does get harder because it's easy to go into the Mexican side of things, right? And Dia de los Muertos opens up so many possibilities for us to tell stories about our grandfathers, our tios, our tias, but also the times that they lived in, and we get to explain that things weren't always the way they are. And as they see the news, we don't necessarily try to shelter them from it. Like Rodrigo said, I think we try to bring things up and have provide context, right? They're 5 and 6, so they're still kind of small, but enough to understand when things don't look right or things look scary. So it allows us to bring back things that hey, some of the things you're seeing on the news that are bad happened here to our ancestors in South Texas. There was plenty of examples with the Texas Rangers back then in the early 20s, hanging Mexicans for being Mexican. So it's important for them to learn as much, I think, as possible the history of where we've all come from, because I think it opens their perspectives to seeing people as people, and that at any point in time, any culture, right, could be under attack or marginalized or minimized, and that's not what we want to be a part of in our family, and we want to try and help prevent that as much as possible. So we'll take any opportunity. I think Disney does a great job lately with Coco and Canto, all those kind of things, to allow parents to explain more in depth about where the setting is taking place in Mexico and Colombia and Guatemala, whatever it is. Shoot, I saw one from the Philippines that they automatically recognized just based off of the Christmas decorations, and we get to kind of keep that fresh in their minds too. That there's people outside of North America and South America and Central America. It's a whole wide world out there that they can experience. So any opportunity that we get, whether it be food, TV, movies, books, we'll take it. And it's so far it's working really well.
I love that idea of, using media, whether it's a television or a movie, or, like you said, the Disney movies, even to springboard a bigger conversation with your kids to teach about culture. I mean, you can watch like you said, Encanto, and talk about where that was located, but you can also watch Mulan and start talking about that culture and why is it that Mulan felt like she wasn't equal to the boy, and she couldn't, it was forbidden for her to go and fight when she really wanted to. And it prompts so many things, and it starts with starting at your kids level wherever they're at, and then sparking these new ideas. And kids are so naturally inquisitive and curious, and they want to know, so it's good. And my question to people on stage is, when we talk about culture, like you said, a lot of it's not very pretty. It's ugly, in fact, especially when you're talking about minority culture. And you got to make everything age appropriate. But when you're trying to tackle some of those darker subjects, like Juan mentioned, people being hanged just because they were Mexican, and if your little girl is Mexican, you don't want to scare them, right? So how do you guys approach these bigger topics, which they should absolutely know and learn? We don't want to shelter our kids too much, and at the same time, we don't want to scare them so that they can't sleep at night. Anybody want to take on that one?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do as a parent is make sure that your kids feel secure and safe. A really important aspect of all this is if you're going to be real with them and transparent with them, let them know, like, hey, here's what I'm doing. We don't have to worry about this or X, Y, whatever, whatnot. Because at the same time that we're trying to keep our children safe, there's actually folks out there that are having a very difficult conversation with their kids, telling them how to be around police officers, for example, how to be protected, right? There's parents out there that are having really tough conversations, and this is Pride Month, but they're having really tough conversations with their kids, telling them, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't wear this because this person might, where you're going might not be safe and this and that. So there's already tough conversations going out there, and kids are having to deal with these real world issues. But the most important thing you can do is make sure that they feel safe. My son, for example, I'm a proud LGBTQ parent, and he likes to dress up and wear his outfits or whatnot. uh, we stopped at a Bucky's recently, on our way back to graduation, and my son's like, "Oh, I need to get dressed. I need to do this and that." I said, "Hey, we're gonna stop at the Bucky's," and my son said, "Okay, I'm not gonna get dressed there." And I said, "Why not?" And I said, like, I don't know. I go, "Man, don't worry about it. I'll walk in with you and we'll walk out. Don't worry about it." He said, "No, no, no. I'm okay with that. I'm just saying, like, I just don't want to deal with the stairs right now." I said, "Hey, whatever suits you." And my whole point for bringing that up is my son feels safe around me. So he does things. But if he considers his own self and he just prefers not to, that's his choice. And I think when we have these conversations with our kids and we're talking about, culture, we're talking about other people's experiences, we're talking about, things that are going on, these tough topics. The first thing we got to do is make sure that our kids do feel safe. How is it relevant to them, and how are we going to protect them and make sure that they feel, hey, you know what, this is a tough convo, but you don't got to worry about it because I'm doing X, Y, Z. Then you go into the conversation and talk to them about it and let them know. And yeah, it's tough. It can be very tough. But I'd rather be the type of parent that I'm transparent with my kids and they know that I'm shooting straight with them, as opposed to telling them something that I, definitely am lying to them or sheltering them in the sense that you just never know where they're going to actually get exposed and they'll learn. This recent example of the tragedy in Uvalde, that's a tough conversation, right? And you want to tell your child, hey, don't worry, this is what's been done, this and that, but they're still gonna feel a certain type of way. So I really feel like it's important to provide security for your kids, make them feel safe to have a conversation, and then be transparent about it and be real with them and look, hey, this is what actually happens. If we, in other households with other kids and so forth. So I think those are the kind of the two main foundations I feel that need to happen for you to have these type of conversations.
I want to reiterate one of those really important topics that you're talking about, and that's teaching the culture in order to keep your child safe, especially when we shelter our kids a little too much sometimes, not because we want to, just because we're trying to keep them safe. And with you, Rodrigo, I also have an LGBTQ child, and we talk about how do you stay safe when we're outside of, certain our bubble and where we go, but true to stereotypes and being like, if you were black and like you said, and you were out trying to deal with a police officer, a black person has to probably, and I'm not black so I can't, I'm kind of just implying here, but they must treat a police officer probably a little bit different than a single white man, for their own safety, just because of the biases out there. It's very sad, but it's a reality. So those tough conversations that parents are having to teach their boys or their girls, but specifically like young males of color, how to interact with some of these, um, certain environments, it's a real thing. And that is part of our culture, is having to deal with some of these stereotypes. I don't know if Danai and Dali, if you guys are listening right now, but if either one of you want to comment on that. I don't know, how do you have those conversations to keep your children safe, and how do you do that?
I definitely have had this conversation, and as a matter of fact, recently I posted something that somebody shared about slang words that Puerto Ricans use, and so of course I showed it to them, and they're like, "Well, it's not a big deal. I don't need it." I'm like, "No, no, you do. You should pay attention because you have to be careful what you say. For example, there's a certain word that Mexican culture uses. I'm going to spell it out because I feel very uncomfortable saying it, but it's Chingona. And it become very popular, in my opinion, from what I've seen. And as a matter of fact, yesterday, one of my friends in California, she's Black and Puerto Rican, but she doesn't know too much of her Latina side. So she messaged me about that word, and she says, "Hey, I thought that that was a derogatory word for for people." And I said, "Well, I know that some Puerto Ricans really take offense to that word, just like Nicaraguenses." And I to make sure, because you grow up here in the United States, and things might be different or might change in your country. So I contact my cousin and I say, "Hey, this word, is it still really offensive? Because I grew up and it's very vulgar, and we just don't use it unless you want to go there." And my cousin's like, "Oh, no, no, that's a Mexican word that's very common, but here in Nicaragua we still don't say that. That's really wrong." So this importance of even learning other cultures and other countries or other languages, this is slang words, is really important because you don't want to offend people, and you also want to like be able to understand the conversation. There's, I mean, it sounds so insignificant, but words really matter. And if you want to have a connection with people, it really helps. And it's, I think, even appreciated when you have a conversation with somebody from, that uses a different dialect and has different culture and uses different slang. And they're like, "Oh, cool, you get it. You get what I'm saying." So, yeah, that's my answer. Thanks.
Yeah, it's so important. I don't know, Juan, Hanan, I don't know if you're listening, if you have anything else you want to contribute to that.
Hey, I'm sorry, my kids came and grabbed me because apparently they found two baby fish in our aquarium that we don't know where they came from. So they were really excited. What was the first question
It,
or the last question?
oh no, we were just talking about some of the more difficult conversations about having to c- teach your kids that our culture comes with some certain biases, and in order to keep them safe, we actually have to teach them these biases, so that they can be, for example, if you were talking to a person of color, if you are a person of color and you're talking to a law enforcement, how do you handle those situations? And I know in the comments, Neda was talking about having, she also had to teach her boys how to interact with police officers so that they would be safe. It's really difficult. It's like, how do you do that? What kind of things do you teach so that we can keep our kids safe? Because we're different. We're brown.
Yeah. No, I mean it's important. My this is very telling, right? Like when my kids were born, well, you see my picture. I'm, I guess, a little Latino. I'm a fairly tan day. I'm a little bit lighter, but that's my day to day. But my kids are very, very, very white. My wife is a little more light skinned than I am. We're both Mexican, but she's more light skinned. But my kids, my daughter was born with kind of a dark blonde hair, green eyes, and my little boy is light brown hair and hazel eyes. But they're, I mean, you would tell they're very white passing. And my great grandma and all my tias were like, "Oh, you're so lucky they were born white. And you're lucky, that you got the prettiest kind of Mexican." That I think is a problem. The stigmas we put on ourselves, right, or the older generations. I think that's one thing that I try to teach my kids. Like we have to break that, and I'm breaking it for them. And telling people like I don't want you to say that in front of my kids. That's not what I want them to think. Like they're not more fortunate or less fortunate than anybody else. But sad to say, in today's climate, in the back of my mind, I get what they're saying, right? Like they won't have some of the struggles that some of my cousins who are much darker skinned Mexicans have. And it's important to teach them that. So we have those conversations about why people are treated differently, and I kind of share some of the stories of even being lighter skinned, some of the ways I was treated as a kid, like 10, 9 years old, when we would go up to Michigan and work in the fields, right? And the drive up from South Texas to Calava, Michigan, there's a lot of spots where we stopped where people didn't like us because they knew what we were, not who we were. Um, it's a hard topic, but I think, like Rodrigo said, if you can be transparent and provide context, I think it helps them. You absolutely want to make sure they know that they're safe and that they're protected, and that when they're with us, they're in a good spot. But to learn those lessons early, right, they can kind of start becoming more aware of it and try to help people in those situations. That's really the biggest thing I want them to learn is, whatever privilege we have, whether it's by, what I've been able to do with my career that affords us an opportunity to have a voice that people listen to by nature of our, putting air quotes up, status, or by nature of what they look like in the future, that if they can help people, that they should.
Love that you said that, Juan. Thank you so much for sharing that because that is very true. I've had those conversations with my son too. Kind of the whole culture, nuestra cultura, güerito. My son, my youngest son, is definitely white passing. Very, very, very light skin, right? Sandy blonde hair, light blue eyes. And so I've talked to them about him, right? And not only in our cultura, we call them, güeritos, blanquito, this and that. There's also a context, an American context towards that. And so I've taught my youngest that, and I told him about what basically is his privilege. He's been called white before. He's been passed up before when it comes to like, hey, certain things. I don't want to veer off too much, but it is very important. That's part of the culture, part of understanding not only our culture but also the culture that he lives in, that he resides on. Basically, when he's on his Xbox talking to folks, or when he's interacting with folks outside, at a restaurant, at a movie theater, XYZ. So I think it's really important, again, to give our kids that kind of a well-rounded interaction, that experience, because, and I'll end it here, what's really important, and Juan said this, and I want to reiterate, is that if we don't tell our kids what it is, they'll form their own narrative and they'll think what it is. And we don't want that to happen. We want our kids to be educated. We don't want them to be miseducated or uneducated, because eventually they'll pick it up somewhere. They'll pick it up on an Xbox game chat that they're having with their friends. When they'll pick it up outside when they're with their buddies at school. I mean, there's so much. There's just so many different places where your kids uh there's just so many different ways that you can interact with your child and let them know what it is out there, what's going on out there, and so forth. So I just wanted to share that, and thank you so much for Juan for sharing.
And I want to add to that too. I think it's really important to have this conversation with children, because we are depicted a certain way in the media. Because I remember distinctly, like when I had that conversation with my kids about, hey, Latinos, we come in different shades and different looks. And they were like, what do you mean? They were little. And I used, like popular culture, people in popular culture, to give them an example. And I remember it was so like, ooh, oh my gosh, like mind blowing to them. I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Like Daddy Yankee is darker than say like J Lo, and then Mark Anthony, and then you have like Asian Latinos, and actually somebody here. Let me see if she's still here, but Avra, who is Mexican, Jew Mexican, and it's just like whoa, mind blowing, right? Because even Latinos, sometimes we think we are like, we're generalized by the media. So if nobody's having that conversation with children, then they're gonna adopt those ideas and just run with it without ever questioning it until something happens. And to your point, Juan, about colorism, it happens, I think, in almost every family. Because I remember my mom saying, even now, if sometimes she catches herself, because we've all six kids that she has, all of us, we point it out when she says things, and we can tell that it's unconscious because she grew up with those ideas. But sometimes she'll say things like, ay, mira cómo se ve la tal y tal, de que la piel bien bonita, está bien clarita. And and to your point about the lighter, the privilege that comes with it, I had a conversation about 2 weeks ago with one of my sisters um who's a lot lighter, with like those the type of eyes that change colors. So they're like gray, but then they change anyway, depending on what she's wearing. So I mentioned to her about how she, how do you feel having that privilege? And she was like, what do you mean, what privilege? And I'm like, oh my god, nobody's ever had this conversation with you. And so apparently she called my other sister, and she was like, can you believe that Dali said that I have white privilege? And then my other sister was like, well, yeah, you do. You're very, very white compared to all of us. So imagine if we would have had that conversation when she was a lot younger, it wouldn't be so shocking to her now as an adult. But yeah, I think these are very, very valuable. And also because I tell my kids, when you're meeting other people, just because of how they look, don't assume that they're not Latino, or that they're not Caribbean, or that they're not like Indian, because you just don't know. People look so different. And, you know, there's been so many times where, like, my husband, because he supposedly he looks Samoan or Filipino, and people talk shit about him, like Latinos in Spanish, not ever assuming that he is Latino. And so he lets them do their rant, and then right as he's about to leave that space, he's like, okay, tengan buen dia. And everybody's like, oh my God, we just talked shit about that person. And he was Latino. So yeah, lots of things that need to be taught to kids about culture. It's not just about the culture, it's about race, it's about injustice, so many things. That's all. Thanks.
And I feel like so much of this is taught by role modeling. Like with us walking the walk, talking the talk, the way we treat people. And like you said, Dolly, oh my goodness, we also have our tios and especially our abuelitos who are still kind of racist from times to times. And they say some things that come out of their mouth and you're like, stop,
Yeah.
don't teach my kids that. I mean, and you're not going to change their mind or their ways anymore, but it is role modeling and trying to, you know, to show that's what kids learn when they watch you. So, are you stereotyping when you go out into different cultures? Are you stereotyping about other cultures, about, the Asian culture, the Indian culture, any of those other, anybody else? Um, and just to not do that. And then within ourselves and our own, I mean, the list goes on, right? But the role modeling is super important. I'm going to stop there. I also want to remind you guys, we have only about 5 more minutes. If you would like to come up and say your last few two bits onto the stage, we'd love to have you. Love to see how you teach culture and anything that's important. Before we close out the room, I want to give you your chance. So come on up.
Okay, before anybody comes up, if I may say something, I just heard what you talked about in having this, if I understood right, racism in our own culture, and that's true because even in our culture, people from the north think that people from the south are less privileged than them. People from the east think that people from the west are, you know. So it's always there, and you'd be surprised when they leave home and come, let's say, to North America, and they are, let's say, treated less because their skin color. They get so offended, and they get so angry, and it's just everywhere. It's just everywhere. So I think we should just teach our kids to how to deal with it. It's there. It's I don't think it's never going to go anywhere. So we have to teach them how to deal with it if it happens, if they come across it. And I think that's a job of parents. And I just want to tell you something that happened to my son. He grew out of in North America, and until he went to the medical school. And one day, where he studied medicine, he actually studied in a place that was dominantly white in the university. And one of the days they're doing the rounds, and him and his friend, they're taking care of patients and stuff like that. And he heard it by his own ears that that guy didn't want him to treat him or look after him. And he said a very bad word. I don't remember the word now. And he at that time didn't even know the meaning of the word. And his friend was so like offended, and he was saying sorry to him on behalf of that guy. He said, no, 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 don't worry about it. But he went and looked at the word, and he actually stood for himself, and he wrote actually an article in a medical journal about all this, what's happening. And and it's not tolerable at all, and it shouldn't be there. So things like that, we have to teach our kids to stand for their rights, to stand for who they are, and demand to be treated as with respect and dignity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hanan. I appreciate your contribution. I'd like to welcome Miguel to the stage. How do you teach culture?
My thing was I got like I'm in a situation that Rodrigo's in, but I wanted to ask him a question about his youngest kid. Has has he had been in any situation that when he went like to a public place with his son that people didn't know the relation? Did someone see him as a threat? Like like that they thought that they needed to defend his kid.
Yeah, I got some looks when I was younger. So my son, like I mentioned before, he's very light skinned, has blue eyes, definitely white passing, and but when he was younger, he was even more light skinned, and his hair was even blonder. So it was definitely, there was definitely some contrast there between he and I. And I never really experienced that where it was just overt, but it was definitely something that I felt eyes sometimes. People looking at me like, "Oh, that's weird. Look at this guy. Mexican dude. I guess quote unquote obvious Mexican guy or whatever." And so I never really experienced that, but I do have friends who also have a contrast in appearance with their kids, and they have been told like, "Oh, okay, is this your nephew, your niece?" And like, "Nah, it's my son." "Oh, really?" And it's like, oh my god, it's a terrible conversation. I really strongly advise nobody to ever start a conversation like that, because you're just offending folks. Okay, people come, like Dali was saying, people come in all shapes, sizes, colors, everything, and you never know what the relationship is between a child and an adult, and unless there's some like super obvious signs of distress, don't get involved. Don't question it. Don't do anything stupid. And I think that's, again, having that fear of something that you don't understand, and then you start conjuring up things that don't even exist. But no, Miguel, I haven't had that experience. Have you had that experience, Miguel?
Um, I got two. So I got two older kids that did that. That went to like a predominantly a white school, and they're light skinned. And when I went in as a parent, people were like, who are you? And I was just like, I'm her father. And they were like, stepfather? Like, I'm like, no, biological. And they just looked at me like I had a second head coming out of my neck. And it's just weird because when you have a kid that's light skinned, what I notice, and people don't believe that it's you, they come and question you like if you were a threat or if you're the help or something. Like it's almost like they come to the aid of the kid thinking that you're trying to take advantage of them. And it's like I just find it funny when people can't even put the two together. Like I'm the parent, you know. So I was wondering how many other people went through that experience.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a difficult experience, and I appreciate you sharing that, Miguel. Because again, it just goes to show that when we infuse culture, and we explain to our kids, the variances, the differences, all that stuff with our own gente and with other cultures, it just leads to a better understanding of other folks. And we don't, our kids have so much to deal with. The last thing we want to do is not prepare them for things that are happening out there, outside our bubble. I know, for example, for me, I didn't grow up with a single Afro Latino in my vicinity. I didn't even know Afro Latinos existed, and I say this with all due respect, but this is just how sheltered I was living here in San Antonio. I didn't even know that Afro Latinos existed until I moved to Houston and went to school at U of H, and I met somebody that spoke Spanish, that was black, that was Afro Latino. It was so, I don't want to say mind boggling, but it was just so different than what I had known. And I, of course, I was like, oh, cool, you speak Spanish. And it wasn't a Spanish that was learned, it was a Spanish that they were raised with. And like, oh, sí, claro, no, 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 no. Oh man, it was amazing, and it opened up my eyes to just how varied our cultura, our lenses, our experiences are just within Latino culture. You know what I'm saying? Or I don't want to say Latino culture. I'm sorry, just within Latinidad. You know what I'm saying? Just how varied and experiences those differences are. So I appreciate you sharing that, Miguel.
Me too, Miguel. I appreciate you saying that because what happened to you probably happens to our adoptive parents. And our adoptive parents are just as much parents as biological parents. And people, that's that school's that's their bad that they did that because they should know better. That's not very nice, I almost think, but it happens. It happens all the time. And I'm glad you brought it up. I'd like to welcome Jason to the stage. Hello, Jason. How do you teach culture to your kids?
Oh, I do a couple of key things. Hopefully, you guys hear me clearly. One, I don't teach my kids racism. I don't code conversations. If you look at my picture, two of my kids, one looks Asian, one looks like me. And we don't code our conversations. We don't refer to white people. We don't refer to other cultures, less than indifferent. We're just different, but we integrate. And one thing I can say, don't teach your kids racism. We do it, believe it or not, in our casual conversations. So how I teach my kids culture, what's really important is process. Like looking at even the basics about how to make a tortilla. Why do Mexicans eat beans? Why do we eat certain foods? And how we in between each other, just looking and saying I love you, why we embrace. So I teach them processes for their identity to go forward, not to go backwards. Because one thing as parents, we got to realize in a growing world that's interconnected through the internet, they're going to learn things 10 times faster than we ever did. They have 10 times more devices and things and apps to tell them identity. So the best thing you're going to do to teach their culture
I would say
is also to embrace
they
their
don't gotta figure it
identity of
out.
who
Just
they
let
are.
them touch.
Are you? Hey, Miguel, you're unmuted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My bad. I'm sorry.
Anyhow, you have to think about this. Don't encourage racist behavior by showing prejudices of indifference between white people and brown people so much to where how they just treat us. Because you know what, believe it or not, as Latinos, we're all colors of the rainbow. We come in all shapes and sizes. There's some that are chinito, there's some negrito, there's some güeros. It doesn't matter. So I'm very, very passionate about this, but it's like Look at the casual conversations as you teach processes to your children so that they can embody who you are, who they are, and the world that they live in. And that's how I teach culture.
Thank you for that contribution, Jason. A lot of great and valid points there. I'd like to give Avra the stage now. How do you teach culture?
Hi, thank you. And I just have to agree that that was an excellent point. We utilize books. So I have, books I get from the Jewish community, Spanish books that, I get from the library and the Spanish community. And that's a great way for us to teach them. Mine are 2 and 3, so they're still very young. And they're also in a multiculturally mixed daycare center. They both speak Spanish. Me and my man speak as best Spanish as we can. He's Mexican American, and I am of Russian, Polish descent, right? But I didn't grow up speaking Spanish, but I'm like self taught. So we like to, when it comes to holidays, explain to them why we're celebrating these holidays, what the significance is for the holidays to both sides, of our differences within our cultures, and just teach them, like basically exactly as he said, 72, that there is no difference in people regardless. Like there's, we try our best to teach them not to see color, not to see those differences, but to see the similarities, and so they're still very young. And that's why I'm so excited to hear so many other people giving their, ways that they're doing it. So I can kind of absorb those and, utilize some of those tools that you guys have all suggested. So just super excited and appreciated for this room. Thank you.
Thank you for coming up and for being here. That's exactly why we opened this room, Avra, so that we can all learn from each other because that's the best way. So thank you so much for being here. And if you don't know, we come on to the Amigos Club every Friday at noon Eastern time. And next week, we're actually going to be talking about antisocial versus loner versus like disaffected and what do you call oh, I'm forgetting the name, like an introvert personality and how we tell the difference. And this is actually in light of what happened with the shootings in Texas, because to we're doing a series of different rooms that not exactly pertain to that, but also were prompted by those events, so that we can learn from that. And if you missed it, there's a replay on that we did last week on how to identify when a child is troubled, a troubled child, a troubled teenager versus your normal teenager behavior. So check out that replay. And so this one next week, it's also in that regard, like how do we tell the difference between our loner kids and our antisocial kids versus an introverted kid? Um, and so I hope that you guys all come back and join us for us next week, noon Eastern time here on the Amigos Club. Last words, Rodrigo and Dali, thank you for being here. I really appreciate you both as always. Rodrigo is a mediator. He didn't have a chance to introduce himself in the beginning. He's an amazing mediator out of San Antonio and Houston, and also does online work. Last words, Rodrigo, before we head up.
Yeah, I think by addressing the topic of culture, we kind of stepped into another discussion that I think we need to have as well, which is the kind of the difficulty sometimes of dealing with people's perceptions when it comes to the relationship in our kids, especially what Miguel was bringing up, what Alvara's bringing up, and what I brought up with my son, where the folks automatically assume that and how that can be difficult. I think that's a great conversation that we should have, and maybe invite specific folks that have had that experience and understanding that experience. So I think that's a great topic there for one of the following weeks. And then lastly, again, the more we teach our kids, the more we let them know what's going on, transparency, the less afraid they actually will be. If we arm our kids with knowledge, they'll be less afraid. And when we don't understand something, oftentimes we it's just natural. You kind of go into this protection mode and you become fearful. But if we teach our kids this culture. When we teach our kids this is what happens over here, and when we teach our kids the realities of the world, they're armed with knowledge and they understand what's going on, and we're not sheltering them. That way, when they do come across that confrontation, that issue, whatever it is, they're better prepared to handle it, and they'll know how to react to it. And so I think that's really the key there, to be transparent, be honest, and provide that security for your kids. So I appreciate everybody that contributed to today's conversation, and always welcome your leadership, Kristina, in making this room happen. So thank you and Dali both.
Thank you. Duly noted. I have a list of rooms that I'm going to be that I have. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna next time I make rooms, this is it. So I'll make sure I put that on my list. Actually, I already did while you were talking, so I have that on there. We'll do that room at some point. And if you have any other ideas for rooms, topics that you would like to hear get discussed, please message me in the back channel. I will definitely put those into account. And then lastly, Dolly, last words.
Actually, I want to invite everybody to listen to my podcast episode on the Dali Talks podcast with Kristina. She gives some really, really good advice, some tips, especially about helping kids build really good habits. And that's you. The link is in my bio, but you can just listen to the Dali Talks podcast on Anchor, Spotify, or Apple Podcast. And that is all. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys for being here. As always, come back for us, and you can check if you like the room and like these kind of topics. Above my head, that's my app. That's where you can get more of me. And hey, you guys have a great day. Go teach your kids some culture and come back and see us next week.
Have a great weekend. Bye.